Hello, and welcome to Econ 202 Macroeconomics, Chapter 13, the Neoclassical Perspective. So we'll look at the Neoclassical model, we'll talk about some policy implications, and then we'll look at the interrelationship between Neoclassical and Keynesian. And hopefully the two perspectives will take a little more clarity on their differences. So Neoclassical is a model of aggregate demand, aggregate supply in the long term. And you will see that we kind of are hovering near over the last nearly 60 years, being right at potential GDP. Actual tends to track very close to it, sometimes a little above, sometimes a little below. Again, my belief is that being above it is only possible for short periods of time because we're using resources for the future. So when we see a kind of extended period of it being over, it makes sense that now we have a time of being under as we kind of get back in line with what is sustainable over a long period of time. Always pause when you need to read the details of the slides to help you understand. So because neoclassical or classical economics is on the long thinking in the long term, 10 years or more, their long range aggregate supply, they had a little coughing fit there. The long-range aggregate supply curve, which is what LRAS stands for, is a straight vertical line. So you may remember in Keynesian, we had a short range, short run aggregate supply, and it was weirdly shaped where it came out to here and then went up. And that's because of the stickiness of wages. They don't go down as easy as they go up. The stickiness of prices in general not going down as easy as they go up. And so that's why the two curves look differently. Is neoclassical is saying those wages and prices of goods are not as sticky, particularly as we look long term, something 10 years or more out. So this is a good one also to pause on, right? And you've got your long range aggregate supply. You've got your short run aggregate supply at time 0, short run aggregate supply at time 1. Remember, 0 and 1, we're just counting up. We take a picture, make it motion. Something happened that shift the supply curve to the right. This represents what's possible. We talk about potential GDP. This is that line, that long-range aggregate supply curve. And so being on it is the goal. And so whenever there's a shift, in this case, an increase, because it was moved to the right of supply, we would shift on the long-range aggregate supply by moving downwards. And then we have an example of aggregate demand shifting left. So it's a decrease. And when that happened, it moved us to a new equilibrium that was off the potential. And so by supply responding, we were able to get back to full potential of what the economy is capable of doing. And that's explained in the notes on the left, and hopefully you can pause and read through some of that. So we have a little time series again here, and there's an inflationary pressure overall for prices to rise as demand is increasing. And this is demonstrated in these kind of 3 points in time, where as there's increasing demand because we have more money to spend, because there's more of us to spend it, to spend money on things, that we kind of start to see a shift in prices rising, and that's what we think of as inflation. And generally over time, this is what we see is pressure on prices to rise over time as demand increases, in part because there's more there's more money in the system. There's more for us to spend. Remember when I said some of my colleagues started their careers off with less than $1 an hour as their earning, and my first job I made $3.15, but my son, he earns significantly more than that in his first job. So the supply side stimulus, because neoclassical is supply focused, where Keynesian is demand focused, says that we focus on the production, not on consumption. And so policies that make it easier to produce are what we should really be doing to spur our economy, making fewer regulations for businesses, lowering business taxes, fewer legalities in the difficulty to start or launch your business, safety nets in case you aren't as successful as you hoped, which is what bankruptcy is, as painful as it is. It's kind of a safety net for those businesses that don't thrive. So in the short time scales, Keynesian seems to be a really good approximation of what we see happening than what neoclassical does. And again, that's 5 years or less. In the long time scales, 10 plus years, we see that neoclassical really seems to explain what we see in the economy as a whole. And in that 5 to 10 year time scale, we have to piece things together in some sort of hybrid model. And this is something discovered by Nobel Prize winner of economics, Robert Solow, in 1987. So you would have seen his name and maybe seen this comment by him. And when you see someone's name you don't know, you ought to look it up and see who they are to see if they're someone maybe you should listen to. And a Nobel Prize winner in economics is a fairly smart individual. This is also a good time to pause and just look at, there's quite a bit on this slide, but it's a comparison of neoclassical to Keynesian. And so if we looked at the focus, is it long or short term? Neoclassical long term, Keynesian short. Prices and wages, are they sticky or flexible? Neoclassical, they're flexible. That's why we have that straight up and down long range aggregate supply. They're sticky in Keynesian, so we end up with that weird shaped horizontal and then vertical, horizontal and then vertical short range aggregate supply because it's short term focused. And then we take a supply side approach to economics in neoclassical, a demand side approach in Keynesian. There's that vertical and there's that kind of upward sloping aggregate supply. The Phillips curve we talked a little bit about, the downward sloping, and that seems to fit most times, but maybe not right now. There are areas that they agree on. And so you can take a minute in here and kind of highlight just the differences between the two. Keynes really did believe in the government running budget surpluses during boom times, and we've not been particularly good at that, and it's not unique to the US, but nations that have run deficits during difficult times are not always as good about saving during boom times. He didn't expect us to build large national debts like we have. He expected that during economic good times, we would save money that could be then spent or used to address the demand shortage during any kind of recession or even depression. So the large national debt that most countries run today actually hinder Keynesian policy from being as impactful or successful as many Keynesian economists believe it would otherwise be. Neoclassical economists really focus on the long run, that what they say about Keynesian economics, that if we focus on the short run, we actually create more volatility. And so there's more business cycles if we keep trying to meddle rather than letting the market take care of the situation. It will kind of even itself out, and we'll have fewer recessions or dips and peaks and valleys happening, and we'll have So we'll just have less of those. It does seem true that Keynesian economics creates more ups and downs in the economy, but maybe keeps them from being as severe or steep or deep as they would otherwise be. So we get more cycles that maybe aren't as severe. And that's a good thing for us to wrestle with. Is it okay to have more difficult times for businesses, for families, for industries, for the economy as a whole, if they don't get as severe as they otherwise might be? Lots of times Keynesian economics is about trying to alleviate the pain that we're experiencing today. So you're going to do one of two things. Either you're going to address what happened back in 2009. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act provided about $8 billion in government spending, which seemed an incredible amount of money at that time. And then they gave some tax cuts. They were trying to jumpstart the economy. And I'd like you to think about, do you think this is a good approach? Why or why not? And if you had been in the auto industry, which was very much decimated and needed a major support and bailout during that time, would that have changed your answer? Or you can think about more recent, in 2020, the CARES Act, and maybe the coming HEROES Act will increase this, but the CARES Act provided roughly $3 trillion in new money to help households, students, unemployed, small businesses, large companies, investors, the healthcare community during COVID. Do you think this was the correct approach? Why or why not? And if you want to ask would your opinion change, you might think about being in the airline industry or the hotel industry, which have been quite decimated during this downturn. All right, I look forward to hearing what you say about one of those two. Again, you do not need to do both. You can pick the one that you'd be more interested to write about. Thanks.